Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. BC Premier John Horgan says he will step down before the next provincial election. The NDP leader asked his party for a leadership race this fall to find a successor. The decision came after a challenging battle with cancer. APTN's Lee Wilson has the story.
Yesterday, at a press conference, BC NDP Premier John Horgan announced he'll be stepping down as Premier before the next election, a decision he says he made along with his wife after a second battle with cancer.
And it's with a great deal of pride that I say to those who are watching today, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, British Columbia. It has truly been the thrill of my life.
The 62-year-old Premier fought throat cancer and completed multiple rounds of radiation treatment coming into this year. He is now cancer-free, but stated he could not be certain it will remain that way 2 years from now, when BC holds its next election. Premier Horgan will remain in his role until a successor is selected, possibly in the fall. On Twitter, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs wished Premier Horgan well when he leaves his role as Premier, and acknowledged his work on the Declaration Act, which was passed into law in 2019. We are ever so grateful for his instrumental work regarding the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. His commitment to work with BC First Nations has been vitally important. Premier Horgan said it was a difficult decision, but he is thinking of his future. He also felt it was time to make room for the next generation of leaders.
And I've talked about the need for generational change in our politics, not just within the NDP, but indeed within all of our political institutions. We need to make space for the next generation to bring forward their ideas and their energy to take on the tasks.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald picked up some additional support today. The Chilcotin National Government says it stands with the National Chief in her call for a forensic audit and fundamental reform at AFN. Earlier this month, National Chief Archibald was suspended by the AFN Executive Committee and National Board of Directors. In a statement, the Chilcotin Nation says, quote, the National Chief's efforts to create change within the AFN organization are long overdue. The suspension itself is egregious and unacceptable. The AFN as an organization is outdated and patriarchal. The Chilcotin Chiefs are deeply concerned that it remains focused on politics rather than improving the lives of First Nations. The suspension of National Chief Archibald must end immediately. The AFN meets in Vancouver next week. An address from National Chief Archibald is listed on the agenda. And for more on the Assembly of First Nations and next week's annual general meeting, we're joined by Negon Sinclair, a columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press, whose latest piece is about the AFN's upcoming AGA being a battleground. Negon, thanks so much for being with us today.
Miigwech, thanks for having me, Darryl.
So, it's been an unprecedented couple of weeks for the Assembly of First Nations, with many allegations being made. The AFN suspending the first woman national chief. What's your take on what's been unfolding so far?
So it's the biggest crisis in the 40-year history of the organization, and certainly the organization's slightly older, coming from the National Indian Brotherhood, but this is just a colossal embarrassment, and it's really a situation of a civil war, a democratically elected national chief who's been ousted rather unconstitutionally by staff and regional chiefs, and then regional chiefs who have allegations of corruption and by the national chief on the other side.
All right, so we're less than a week away from the AFN's annual General Assembly, one that the AFN had said the national chief could not attend. At one point there was a resolution trying to overturn Archibald's election victory. What are you expecting at the AGA?
Well, I'm hearing from sources, rather well-up sources within the regional chief circles, that there's an actual security firm that's being told to keep her out of the meeting itself. It will be a Not a good look. It'll be, so many of the non-Indigenous world wants to believe that our governments are corrupt, wants to believe that we're not capable of handling governmental affairs. So much of these stereotypes are going to be seen on so many levels this weekend. And it's really a colossal failure on both sides, particularly by the national chief to not be able to bring people onto the side of her vision. And then on the other side, the regional chiefs who seem to just not want change in any direction. The AFN has been moving more and more towards regional control by the regional chiefs. And of course, that was under the years of Perry Bellegarde. And it seems that the regional chiefs just don't want to give up that control. And so we've really got a logjam situation. I just don't know a solution here other than a court battle.
Now, Nigan, you wrote in your column this week that this, quote, is an embarrassment and stain on what is supposed to be one of the most important Indigenous political organizations in the country, end quotes. Now, do you think there will be long-term harm to the credibility, of the AFN?
Well, it's not only harmful and, of course, embarrassing, but this was supposed to be the most progressive year in the AFN history. The first elected female national chief who had come in promising to provide transparency for the organization, to restructure what really has become an irrelevant old boys club in so many different ways. And the fact is that communities don't really get any representation in the AFN, never have, but particularly so in recent years when the national chief is working so closely with the federal government. Roseanne Archibald came in promising that that would change. And of course, a national chief position is always a weird position because you're really a spokesperson of a lobby group. You're not a government, you're a spokesperson. And so you're supposed to be able to work with people, and certainly Roseanne Archibald just hasn't been able to get people on her side. At the same time, I think the regional chiefs have not been able to work effectively or be able to give up some of their power. And so what we're going to see is a logjam, which will hurt this organization where it is already seen as almost irrelevant by many of the member nations. People are dropping out of the AFN and are not seeing the movement that is needed. Certainly the autonomy and the movement towards sustainability, financial sustainability, to get away from governmental dollars and to start to stand on its own 2 feet as an organization. I mean, that's been the movement certainly of Métis National Council and the Manitoba Métis Federation as they've moved away from just relying on program dollars from the federal government. So the AFN just is going to be in that situation where they're going to be mired in more fights internally than to be able to work externally and represent the people, everyday First Nations people in some meaningful way as it continues to sort of move away from communities.
And lastly here, Nigan, your column also mentions the potential for the federal Liberal government looking bad here. Can you elaborate quickly on that?
Yeah, I mean, the situation is always that the federal government needs the AFN more than the AFN needs the federal government. And what I mean by that is that the federal government doesn't have a partner. They don't have a dance partner when it comes to consultation or program delivery or just photo ops to deliver on major political policy. If the AFN were to fall apart, the federal Liberals would have nobody to participate with and to appear at meetings with, and they would have to go to individual chiefs on individual First Nations or regional chiefs organizations. And so what that means is if the AFN is mired in infighting, it just won't be able to participate with the federal Liberals, which is perhaps why it's been accused, certainly Perry Bellegarde and some of the regional chiefs, of being just outright representations of the Liberal Party within the AFN itself. And I point out in my column that it's really problematized when you have regional chiefs who are not democratically elected by other chiefs, especially at the chiefs at large at the AFN, more just in their regions. And they are stopping the movements from a democratically elected national chief, good, bad, great, ugly, whether they agree with them or not. It is the national chief. This is the organization. If you're to follow democracy, then you would follow the views of the national chief to try to provoke change. And the fact that the regional chiefs just won't move on that direction, and many of them are Liberal Party stalwarts, suggests that there is a real mingling between the Liberal Party and certain forces within the AFN that's highly problematic.
All right, Nigan, we'll have to leave it there. Certainly appreciate your thoughts on all this.
Yeah, Miigwech, thanks so much.
All right, we have to step aside for a short break, but when we come back, a facility that brings back youth in foster care in southern Alberta has officially opened their doors. Welcome back to APTN National News. The mother of a boy missing for 3 decades is frustrated that RCMP have not yet investigated an old well site in Saskatchewan, because that well may hold clues as to what happened to him and his adoptive grandmother. APTN's Leanne Sanders has that story.
Yeah, it's hard.
Marlene Charles Halkett still gets emotional talking about her missing son. Her family has never stopped looking for 16-year-old Kevin Charles. He went missing in 1993 from the north central community of Chittick, along with 67-year-old Mary Goodfellow. Marlene says they had sent Kevin to stay with Goodfellow so he could help her and to get him away from trouble he had been getting in at home on the Little Red Reserve near Prince Albert. Marlene Halkett and Mary Goodfellow were both adopted and grew up together. Halkett says after Mary and Kevin went missing in 1993, her husband never stopped looking for them, but he died without ever finding out what happened to them.
It's been pretty rough and worse now since he's been gone for like 5 years, so it's been by myself, doing it by myself. So, you know, during the years it was good I had help, but it slowly wavered off, so it got harder.
Halkett was with searchers who located an old well near Leoville 2 weeks ago. That well had been identified by Spiritwood RCMP in 2006 after receiving information that it could be where the missing pair had been placed. Officers had taped off the well, but it was never excavated. Debbie Thomas is a missing persons activist and helped the Halketts put up billboards of Kevin and Mary. She believes there may be people out there with information who are afraid to come forward, even after all this time.
To report my tip to the RCMP makes me a rat. And then the other thing is, you're living in that community and you're looking over your shoulder and you don't feel safe in your community no more.
After APTN inquired about the case earlier this month to the RCMP's Historical Crimes Unit, they told us they assigned an officer to review the files. We asked to get an update on what progress has been made by the investigator, but have yet to receive a response. Thomas says she's frustrated by the lack of action on the file by RCMP and feels Indigenous leaders should be stepping up and has been contacting chiefs and councils in the area.
Kevin Charles is a member of Montreal Lake. Mary Goodfellow is a member of Pelican Lake. You should be supporting Marlene in getting that well dug up. You should be making the RCMP responsible or answer to the fact that they overlooked a tip for 15 years that should have been dug out 15 years ago. Maybe Marlene could have had closure.
Thomas says families should not have to look for justice on their own and says an independent missing persons office is needed. I'll have more on that story next week. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Prince Albert.
A facility that brings back youth in foster care in southern Alberta has officially opened their doors. Their goal is to reintroduce their cultures and provide them a place to call home. APTN's Chris Stewart was there.
On Tuesday, the Nukawa Family and Youth Center had a grand opening in the town of Fort Macleod. While operating for the past 2 years, COVID had delayed their official opening to the public. The Youth Center is bringing back Indigenous children from the Alberta foster care system. The nonprofit has no government funding. It is funded by First Nation authorities across Alberta who want to bring children from the care of the province to the care of this youth center. Karen English is the executive director. She says youth aged 12 to 17 who are here may have lost some of their culture while being in the care of non-Indigenous homes. She says the Nukawa Family and Youth Centers immerses youth in Blackfoot, Cree, and other cultures.
The difference between our group care facility and mainstream is that we're doing this from an Indigenous perspective, and it's indigenously led and run. and we derive all of our programming through our value systems of Indigenous people.
Inglis says that reconnecting young people to their roots gives them a better feeling of self-worth and future success.
I believe that the kids in care, they need to be connected to who they are as Indigenous children. They need to understand their language. They need to understand their cultures, their ceremonies. I see that better outcomes will derive from kids when they're learning about where they come from and who they are. And that's what we focus on. That is the main purpose for Nuku'a.
Peter Strikes with a Gun is a former chief and is the board chair. He has fostered 60 youth over the decades. He says the province has not done enough for Indigenous youth. He says this youth center has helped and will help immensely.
I was a very big part of the transitions, but it seems that it never changed. They just went through the old school term, and children were just being shipped around, and they were not being given the sense of belonging, and eventually they come back to the reserve with no heritage. And we've lost a lot of good people as a result of the system that they were put into.
Inglis says that the young people who stay here are family, even after becoming adults.
We've had some youth that have left, and a lot of them would call to come back home because they know this is their home. We always say, this is your home. It's not like when you age out, we're done. You're always our relative. I'm always going to be your auntie or your grandmother or your mom. We're here. We're family.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Fort Macleod, Alberta.
And now to Thunder Bay, Ontario, for more reaction to the suspension of Police Chief Sylvie Hoth. She was suspended after allegations of misconduct surfaced. Reg Niganobi is the Grand Council Chief of the Anishinaabe Nation, and he joins me now. Chief Niganobi, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your day today to speak with us.
Thank you.
So, what is your reaction to the suspension of Chief Hoth?
To some degree, we're kind of welcoming it. It's the start in a long process that's going to be taking place. It's good to see that there is at least some sort of accountability taking shape or taking form, but there's more to be desired and more to be seen.
So how do you think this will affect the Indigenous people in Thunder Bay and the surrounding area?
Probably not an immediate impact right away, but at least it gives some sort of hope that some things will change moving forward and somebody's being held accountable, at least in some aspects.
And what would you like to see going forward in regards to all this?
I'd like to see a more positive change within the whole Thunder Bay Police Services as it is. Altogether, a little bit more respect for our Indigenous people living in the area and a little bit more safety for the Indigenous people living in the city and surrounding areas. A little bit more, I would say, not only just accountability, but a little bit more compassion, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more justice and equality.
And Chief Niganobi, how can the Indigenous community be maybe a little bit more involved in all this as well?
I think a lot of it might be sharing the stories that they've experienced during that time, participating in any kind of feedback that they're kind of requesting in terms of, coming forward with situations that may have arisen, but also realizing that that's an incredibly tough thing to ask of somebody, but only for those who are ready to do so. Of course, we have had people on the board who have come forward, and they've kind of indicated that they've had some retaliation in some aspects, or at least been roadblocked in some ways. So, it is a tough ask, but if they are willing and they feel comfortable to do so, to be able to share those sort of things and help us keep an eye on the situation and help us inform us of what's going on the ground there.
All right, Chief Niganobi, I want to thank you for taking a few minutes here to speak with us today about this.
Thank you.
It's time for one final break, but still to come, 85 new recipients are to be awarded with the Order of Canada. Details when we come back. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Danielle Tutusas sent in this great picture that was taken by their 11-year-old son, Lyric. This was taken near Grandora, Saskatchewan. Great picture, Lyric. You might just have an eye for photography. And we want to see pictures from all across the country. Send your pictures to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. And now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting in the east, 24 in rain in Charlottetown and 26 in rain in Halifax. 20 in Happy Valley Goose Bay and 17 in Cartwright. 23 and some rain in Quebec City and 20 in Val-d'Or. 32 in sunshine in Windsor and 26 in North Bay. Some showers and 27 in Thunder Bay and 14 in showers in Big Trout Lake. 10 degrees in Churchill and 15 in Norway House. 16 in Barons River and 22 in Dauphin. Some showers and 22 in Estevan and 22 in North Battleford. 20 degrees in La Ronge and 17 in Uranium City. Over in the west, 20 degrees in High Level and 28 in Peace River. 22 and showers in Edmonton and 22 and showers in Calgary. 22 in Campbell River and 22 in Bella Coola. 16 in Sandspit and 26 in Fort Nelson. 27 degrees in Watson Lake and 22 in Rock River. 25 degrees in Fort Liard and 23 in Norman Wells. 20 degrees in Colville Lake and 22 in Nunavik. 10 degrees in Whale Cove and 13 in Cambridge Bay. 7 degrees in Arctic Bay and 11 degrees in Iqaluit. Today it was announced that 85 new recipients are to be awarded with the Order of Canada. There's some pretty notable Indigenous names in the mix, including former members of Parliament Ethel Blondin Andrew, Nancy Karatek Lindahl, and a judge and former Chief Commissioner of the MMIWG inquiry, Marianne Buller, as well as 2 pairs of elders, Reg and Rosemary Croshoe, for the preservation of Blackfoot culture and language, and David Gerard and Imelda Mary Purley for their contributions to academic and cultural landscapes. Haida artist Reginald Lester Davidson was named as well. The appointees will be presented with their insignia at a future ceremony. All right, that's all we have for you this Wednesday of APTN National News. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you for joining us, and have a great night.